Hey guys, welcome to the channel. In this video, I'm going to discuss the previews for the next big Kill Team box, Kill Team Typhon. So I have got to say, when I initially heard the name, I did think, are we going to get like another Plague Marine team? It seemed pretty weird, but obviously Typhon, totally different thing. So, for the Tyranid Kill Team, the Raveners are the stars of the show. As we can see here, we got 5 specialists and 1 warrior. Now, as Games Workshop kind of been designing the teams throughout this edition, the warriors aren't always a sort of a total disappointment. Sometimes they get some really interesting and valuable skills, so we might end up wanting to make the warriors. We've got the Prime, which has that cool little head crest thing going on. We've got the Fell Talon, which has got kind of a little bit goofy looking, in my opinion, but it almost looks like the old Toxin Sax biomorph from 3rd edition. And we've got the warrior itself. I actually think of all the sculpts, the warrior is the strongest. I just feel it's kind of it's just got the best silhouette. It doesn't look as busy, I guess. The Tremor Scythe. Now again, I think it's a good design, sort of. It's a good design philosophy for Kill Team, especially to have very unique looking and very how do I put this? Immediately identifiable designs. So obviously, Fell Talon's the poison guy. The Venom Spitter's got a big sack and kind of jets in its mouth. You can't really see it from the picture on here, but the record does have big old One Eye style crab claws. So those are sort of some really immediately identifiable elements. But I do think, particularly the Fell Talon, the Tremor Scythe, and the Venom Spitter have kind of very busy, very busy designs. I maybe would have preferred the old Carnifex sort of enhanced senses. Almost had like bunny ears. It wasn't like three sets of bunny ears like our man ears got with the Tremor Scythe, and like an eye in the middle. I think like they had like sort of 3 sort of eyes, almost like compound eyes, mounted together. I think that would have been maybe a simpler and better design in terms of the silhouette. But I really can't complain, we're getting Tyranids and Kill Team finally. So, they've been given a ground up redesign based on a mixture of the 3rd edition miniatures and the old Red Terror mini. And I'm really sort of, I am really feeling these design decisions. The tails themselves, particularly, are reminiscent of that old school 3rd edition metal Red Terror. It was probably I think it was probably the first metal miniature that I ever attempted to make, back when I was like, God, 11, maybe 12, and it was made of so many thin white metal parts. I didn't know how to pin stuff. It was a nightmare. But either way, it's got an interesting design. I certainly think the kind of the chitinous elements in the splits in the tail and stuff like that, they really sort of like how do they work? I'm looking at them thinking, how does that work? And I think that's a good thing to be asking yourself when you're looking at Tyranids, because they're supposed to be so alien and so strange. One thing to mention about the sort of the Tyranid release is how strange it is that it is a 5 model kill team. Usually, the preconceived notion of a Tyranid army, especially at the troop scale, is hordes. You're expecting Gaunts, Termagaunts, Hormagaunts, Rippers, Gene Stealers. You're expecting very, very sort of heavy numbers as opposed to elite minis. And I do think it's cool that Kill Team has flipped that sort of preconceived notion of what they are and how they play in the wider game on its head. And I think it's a cool way of viewing the Tyranids as well, because in a sort of very what's the word, a very urbane sort of civilian level, these guys would be terrifying. It's only because there's people running around in power armor and Lehman Russ tanks and bloody Rogel Dawns and stuff like that they can kind of view them as silly bugs that need to be killed en masse. So yeah, I do think it's a cool way of imagining, sort of reimagining the Tyranid sort of design philosophy in the kill team space. And we finally got a 5 model kill team. Whether we run all the specialists with a warrior or what, we'll see. But we finally got that fabled 5 model team under our belt. I'll talk about the mechanics and stuff like that a little bit later on, because we've got all the tokens to run through as well and break down. But let's just move on to the Adeptus Mechanicus team now. So this time we've got Tech Priests and not Skitarii. So you've got the Techno Archaeologist, the Servitor Underseer, the Gun Servitors themselves, which is supposed to have access to strange weapons, Volkite weaponry, stuff like that. So it'll be interesting to see how that is sort of implemented rules wise in Kill Team, because I don't think we've seen very many of those kinds of weapons. We've got the Breacher. I wonder if that's going to behave like the Orc Boy Breacher, and it's going to create access points using tokens. We've got the Techno Medic Servitor, standard medic I guess. Auto Proxy Servitor. I guess this is going to be the comms guy for the team. It'd be really interesting to see how this works overall with the army mechanic that they kind of briefly touched on in the in the preview. And then obviously you've got the servitors themselves. The main guy, the Techno Archaeologist, is a repackage of the sort of I think it was the Blackstone Fortress. Yeah, the Blackstone Fortress Techno Archaeologist. It is a gold sculpt. I do kind of, I enjoy the silhouette. I do think he looks very Martian, which is cool. But I'm a little bit sort of not underwhelmed, but I just think it's a bit of a missed opportunity in terms of we could have had a really cool Tech Priest mini, like a full blown Tech Priest. I know in the previous edition of Kill Team 2018, they had like an Elite expansion, and we got like the fat Tech Priest, doing the cool hand sign, shooting sort of like a rail rifle over his shoulder, and there are so many really cool John Blanche artworks for all kinds of Tech Priests, really thin, gangly, spindly ones, like centipede ones that look a bit like Call. And instead we kind of just got, it's the guy from Blackstone Fortress. Maybe it makes sense because it's a much more sort of civilian scale game, and we can't have like a 10-foot land train of a Martian priest rolling through the board, but there we are. The Underseer itself looks pretty cool. I do like the silhouette and stuff like that. That does kind of lean into that Blanchian idea of a Tech Priest almost. I can see sort of that bulbous dome on the top of him looks a lot like one of the other Tech Priests. I think the belly of the fat Tech Priest from the previous box is that same, almost like a old boiler housing style silhouette. It also reminds me of the dirigibles in the Sky Dwarfs from Age of Sigmar as well. So obviously they must be repurposing those CAD files handily. So how does it work? So it's a 10-man team which transfers APL via the new spheric network. That was how it was described in the Adepticon preview. And it will be interesting to see how this is implemented. Will it be sort of will it be a little bit like the Hyrotech Circle, maybe? So we've got those sort of, maybe these will be the spiritual successors to the Hyrotech Circle playstyle. Once they're out of rotation, and they can't go to golden ticket events and all that stuff, maybe these guys will take up the mantle for the team that has interesting leader models and sort of unique leader models, and is it called the Apprentech? So you have a Lord and an Apprentech in the Hyrotech Circle team. So obviously in this instance we have the techno archaeologist and the Underseer running around. Maybe they'll be able to bounce APL off each other or bounce APL into the servitors, as well as do things like relay attacks or relay actions. Could be interesting. So next up, we've kind of got the kind of stole the show a little bit, the terrain itself. So every Killzone box upon release in this season has had narrative terrain. It was the same with the Gallowdark stuff as well. Previously, we got like gun turrets and breachable walls and things like that. But in this instance, we got the Tyranid infestation. Pretty cool, considering it's the final for the Volkus Killzone in this season. A bit of a weird flex, I thought, because obviously we got sort of expansions to Volkus itself, in terms of like bunkers, and then obviously the shrine, and now sort of a whole newly minted Tyranid infestation sprue. It seems a bit of a weird flex. I mean, I'm into it. I think it looks amazing. I'm hoping, sort of quietly in my heart of hearts, that it's a hint at the next Killzone, and we could get the sort of the fabled jungle environment that has been bounced around the rumour mill for quite some time now. I think it could also be a really 40k way of executing that environment. We've had the old, remember the old I think it was 4th edition maybe, or 3rd edition. We had a box set with Black Templars and Dark Eldar, and it had some jungle trees in it, little spruce stands. They were rad. And then we've had other jungles with the spine shard trees and stuff like that in the past. So I think it would make sense for them not to retread that ground, and focus on something a little bit more sort of unique. And definitely the Tyranid terrain itself would fulfill that niche. Also, this whole season of 40k, the wider game, is the Tyranids are the main adversary. So just like we had the Necrons in the last edition, in this edition, the Tyranids present the main threat. So it would make sense for us to have a terrain set that represents the falling of the falling of an Imperial world with Tyranid parts. I really like them anyway, and they pay homage to the original Forge World line of terrain, from the fabled Amphalion project, which is basically like Jurassic Park in space. It's a really interesting. I guess they're called, like, they were like expansion books back in the day that Forge World made. They ended up kind of becoming the Horus Heresy red books and stuff like that. And each of them would always have really unique minis and units. So, some of them would have Titans in. This one had the Hierophant Bio Titan, I think, but it may have, and I'm pretty sure it had like the original flying Hive Tyrant and the Wrecker Khan effects and stuff like that. So some really weird mutations. It was a really, really cool expansion, and I am happy that they've kind of paid homage to it in plastic by releasing this stuff. Fingers crossed we get Killzone Tyran. So let's talk about the tokens and kind of what they hint at here. So we've got an abundance of plus and minus APL. So this could hint at APL manipulation in both teams. So Obviously, we've got a row at the top there of loads of APL modifiers with the Mechanicus stuff, which would make sense given that their whole mechanic is the new spheric link and sharing actions or sharing APL. But we do also have a few on the the Tyranid sort of line of tokens there at the bottom, which could mean there's some sort of APL modification with the Raveners as well. The vibration kind of token, if you look to the right, the bottom right of the set, a sort of a wave detection token there from the probably the tremor site, which is supposed to be able to track fear and track motion through its sort of its sensory array on its head. Now, usually those little circular tokens are used to mark debuffs, so it will be interesting to see, if the tremor site can sense motion, stuff like that, as it moves close, drops a debuff on a target, it might sort of relinquish some of the limits of the tunneling mechanic that it's been discussed with the Raveners. This tunneling mechanic is it was only described in vague terms, but we can see emergence tokens just there, which would hint at some sort of debuff as they emerge from their sort of the movement. If it behaves anything like the Mandrake's ability to move around the map in the Shadow Passage sequence, they can't charge after they emerge, or they count as having made a normal move, stuff like that. It might be interesting to see if that Tremor Site token removes some of those limitations. You'd imagine if a Ravener could hear you through the through the ground, through the earth, and it communicates that information to its brood brothers. It could pop up and attack you straight away. Maybe, I don't know. We also get the good old blit markers, so these could come into play for the NPO Hormagaunts that are supposed to be in the box set. I'm personally, by the way, made up that they've done that because I've been looking for an excuse to buy this kit for a while. I can't really justify it to myself, unless I start picking up 40k again and playing with Tyranids. But I get to own and paint and play with some of the definitely the coolest minis from the Tyranid re-release. They look really sort of Raptor-esque, and my only kind of regret almost is that I don't get to play with them in normal games of Kill Team. It would have been really cool to have like a Crew Hound style unit to run around just jumping at people whilst the Raveners, dig tunnels and stuff. What parts of the preview did I like? I really like the new design for the Raveners. I think the overall look of the minis, it really reminiscent of the 5th and 3rd edition artwork. I've just put it here on the slides for you to look at now, but I would recommend checking these out in sort of HD and seeing how these are on the codex art in the background. I've got the 3rd edition artwork up on my wall. It's just super alien, super cool. I've written here. I wanted to know what those spines are called, along the arms and along the carapace, because they're present in the new Screamer Killer. The new sort of carapaces basically in the Tyranid line. And I was thinking, what are they? And the only thing I could think about with anything coming close to that look was crabs, man. So I went on this weird crab research rabbit hole. They're called anterolateral teeth, which is fitting given that the Tyranids and they want to eat you. They're common in cephalopods, and it's a really interesting design element to lean into with Raveners, and a legacy design element that feels like it's being done justice. So what I mean by that, when I say a legacy design element being done justice, is they've always been there. If you look at the Carnifex on the right in the 4th edition artwork there, you can see it's covered in these sort of anterolateral teeth in the spines and stuff like that. And the minis kind of feel like they're reflecting that artwork now, rather than the sort of the very limited way that they used to be able to. Um, it's cool seeing these new designs breathe life into the minis based on the old classic artwork. The design language essentially is what I like about this new sort of this new line of minis. The striations and the imperfections in the carapace, as well as the anterolateral teeth and the spines. They really make me sort of think of protean evolution. The very earliest life, like horseshoe crabs, ammonites, things like that. Interesting design space to fill them. Very Lovecraftian. Very cosmic horror, ancient evolutionary beings kind of thing. What I didn't like. So, the Adeptus Mechanicus team does seem a little bit uninspired. And I do feel like it's a bit of a missed opportunity, because you could have had a Dark Mechanicum team with a menagerie of goons. We've already got, tech priests, and we've already kind of got servitor models spread throughout various releases. And I just think, man, that could have been some crazy tarantula style tech priest with loads of horrible, disgusting, sort of spiny, evil looking servitors, and they could have had very unique roles, as opposed to gun servitor, or heel servitor. You could have had all kinds of crazy designs coming through, butchers, industrial elements, welding tools, stuff like that. And I don't know, I just feel like that was a very missed opportunity. Who knows? We might get a Dark Mech team down the line. I'll be made up. I just felt like they needed a vehicle to release a generic servitor box. It's one of those weird kits that doesn't have a home. Because everyone's got servitors. The Tech Marines from the Space Marine line use servitors. Imperial agents are going to want servitors. And obviously the Mechanicum are going to want servitors. Even the bloody engine seers in Imperial Guard are going to want servitors to help them with fixing stuff, things like that. So that's where usually, classically, all those sort of little individual models will come out. And I just feel like this was a vehicle for them to drop a servitor box. But we'll have to see. I mean, the rules, I feel, may make up for, they may make up for all that. They might have some very interesting choices in terms of the rules and in terms of how the tech priests themselves interact with the servitors. Again, you got so many cool designs. We got I've just put one, the first Google image I could find. Look at all the crazy tech priests you're looking at there. They might not be Chaos tech priests, but they could be. They could be switched out pretty easily. And if you look at all the sort of mechadendrites and feelers coming out the back, and hands getting sort of plugged into printers on the chassis of the body, and servo skulls with weird strange shapes to them and stuff like that. That could have been such a cool way of diving into that design space. Ironically, the Raveners are a unit in 40k that required a vehicle to be released in, and even though that was the case as well with the Raveners, I feel like they almost hit the mark in terms of what Kill Team requires. I just feel like with the Raveners, they sort of hit the mark in terms of what makes them interesting for Kill Team. Very unique specialists with strong silhouettes and obvious and recognizable, specializations. Whereas they kind of mask it a little less, I suppose, with the Tech Priest Kill Team. I just feel like they wanted to drop a servitor box, and they threw in a new overseer, which probably would come in the box as well, I would imagine, because they're going to want a minder, aren't they, on the battlefield. So we kind of I don't know. I just don't feel like it was masked as well as the Ravener release. I hope you enjoyed the little breakdown of Kill Team Typhon. If you've got anything to say, any discussions or anything like that, please pop it in the comments below. Cheers.